I didn't make a scene. I didn't send a single text. I just sat in that folding chair, still wearing my cap and gown, holding a diploma I had spent 6 years earning, and I looked out at all the families crowding the gymnasium floor, fathers lifting toddlers onto their shoulders, mothers pressing their faces into their daughters' hair, grandparents with tears streaming down their cheeks, and I understood, completely, and without any room for doubt, that something had to change. Not tomorrow. Not after one more conversation. That day. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because if I don't explain how I got there, the ending won't make any sense. I grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, the older of 2 children. My brother was born 4 years after me, and from the moment he came home from the hospital, the house rearranged itself around him. Not in the way most families make space for a new baby. In the way a solar system forms, everything orbiting one center, everything angled toward one source of light. My brother was that light. I learned very early that I was something else. I was the background. The furniture. The thing that was always there and never quite seen. He was gifted at sports. Football, specifically. By the time he was 12, my father had pulled him out of Little League to focus entirely on football, driving 2 hours each way to practice 3 nights a week. My mother started meal prepping high-protein lunches every Sunday. The refrigerator had a whiteboard on it with my brother's training schedule, his upcoming games, his stats. My school events, recitals, honor roll ceremonies, science fairs were written in pencil on a paper calendar in the junk drawer. His were color-coded in marker on the whiteboard. I want to be careful here, because I know what some people think when they hear a story like this. They think the person telling it is exaggerating, misremembering, bitter. So, let me give you one specific memory and let you decide for yourself. When I was 16, I was accepted into a competitive summer program at Ohio State for pre-nursing students. It was invitation only, 40 students from across the state. I had applied on my own, without telling my parents, because I had learned by then that anything that required their attention or participation had a high chance of just not happening. I got in. I was so proud of myself I could barely sleep the night I found out. I told my parents at dinner. My father looked up from his phone, said, "That's great, honey," and looked back down. My mother asked if the dates overlapped with any of my brother's games. I checked. 1 game. 1, she said. "We'll have to figure out the logistics," and the conversation moved on. I went to that program. I took the bus both ways. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was independent, self-sufficient, mature for my age. I told myself a lot of things at 16 that kept me from seeing the truth clearly. The truth was that I had been conditioned, from a very young age, to need as little as possible from the people who were supposed to give me everything. I'm saying this because I know there are people who will hear this story and ask why I didn't just walk away sooner, why I kept trying, why I kept giving. And I want to answer that question honestly, because it's the most important question in all of this. When you are raised to believe that you are the reasonable one, the low-maintenance one, the one who doesn't need much, you internalize that as identity. You don't see it as deprivation. You see it as your personality. It takes a very long time, and usually one very specific moment of clarity, to understand that what you mistook for independence was actually just loneliness you had learned to call strength. I graduated high school with honors and got a partial scholarship to a nursing program at a community college. My parents helped my brother with a car that same year. I don't say that with resentment anymore. I say it because it is factual and because it matters for understanding what came next. I worked through school, waitressing, then a job at a medical billing office, then eventually a position as a patient care technician at a hospital that let me get clinical hours while earning a paycheck. I was exhausted for 4 straight years. I ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches in parking garages between shifts. I studied in the break room at midnight. I didn't complain, because complaining felt like weakness, and weakness was not something I had ever been allowed to practice. I graduated with my nursing degree when I was 24, took my boards on the first try, and got hired at a hospital in Cincinnati. Good salary, real benefits. My own apartment for the first time, with windows that faced east and a kitchen that was entirely mine. And then, Slowly, the call started. My mother called first. Just to catch up, she said. My brother was at a Division II school on a partial athletic scholarship, but the tuition gap was significant. My father had taken a pay cut. Things were a little tight. Just temporarily. I sent them $500. Then, $800. Then it became a monthly thing. Not because they asked directly. Not at first. It was always framed as a crisis, a one-time thing, an emergency. But emergencies have a way of becoming permanent when you don't address the underlying pattern. By the time I was 27, I was sending my parents $1,800 a month. That is not a typo. $1,800, transferred to their account on the first, like a bill I had signed up for without ever reading the contract. My brother, by this point, had finished school and was working a retail management job in Columbus. He lived with my parents. He did not contribute to the household expenses. My parents paid for his car insurance, his phone, his groceries. They were functionally supporting two adults on one income and asking me to make up the difference, and I was doing it. And I told myself it was the right thing to do because they were my family and family takes care of each other. What I did not examine closely enough was the fact that family takes care of each other was only ever applied in one direction. I was 29 when I enrolled in a part-time RN to BSN bridge program. I wanted my bachelor's degree. I wanted to move into a clinical coordinator role eventually. It meant night classes twice a week on top of my regular shifts, which were already 12 hours. It meant 3 years of that schedule. I did not tell my parents right away, because I knew what would happen. My mother would make a comment about how I was always so busy. My father would ask if it affected my ability to keep sending money. My brother would say nothing, because my brother rarely acknowledged my existence in any meaningful way. I told them at Thanksgiving, the second year of the program. My mother said she hoped I wasn't taking on too much. My father asked if the degree would mean a raise. My brother looked at his phone. I finished the program 14 months later, completed my capstone, submitted my final project at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday while sitting on the floor of my apartment eating cereal from the box. I passed my final evaluation on a Thursday. My graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in late April. I sent my parents the date in January. I sent them the specific time and location in February. I asked, and I want to be very precise about this, I asked 4 separate times if they were planning to come. Each time, my mother said, of course, absolutely, we wouldn't miss it. My father said yes. My brother said he'd try. I bought them tickets to the ceremony. I made a reservation at a restaurant near the venue for dinner afterward. I told my coworkers my family was coming. I told my closest friend, who offered to come as backup and whom I told wasn't necessary because my family would be there. 3 days before the ceremony, my mother called. She said it in this particular voice she uses when she has already decided something and is simply informing you of it while performing the appearance of a conversation. She said that my brother's team, he had joined a recreational flag football league, had their regional tournament that same weekend in Cleveland. She said it had just been scheduled, which was interesting because regional tournaments do not get scheduled 3 days in advance, but I did not say that. She said my father really wanted to support him, and she couldn't let my father drive all that way alone, and my brother needed the support right now because he'd been going through a hard time. I asked what kind of hard time. She said he'd been feeling a little down lately. I sat with that for a moment. My brother had been feeling a little down, and that was the reason they were not coming to a graduation ceremony I had worked toward for 3 years, across 6 years of nursing education total, while supporting their household with my salary and eating cereal on the floor at 2 a.m. to finish my coursework. I said okay. I said it so quietly she asked if I was still there. I said yes. I said I understood. I said I hoped the tournament went well. I hung up the phone and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The morning of graduation, I did my own hair. I drove myself to the venue. I found my seat among the other graduates, many of whom had entire sections of bleachers filled with their people, parents, spouses, children, friends. My friend had offered again to come, and I had said no. And I regret that now. Not because I needed witness to my success, but because I deserved to have someone there who loved me. I walked across that stage alone. Someone I had never met shook my hand and gave me my diploma. People in the audience cheered for their own people. I smiled, because you smile when you cross a stage. And then I went back to my seat and I looked out at those families and I understood. Not just that my parents had made a choice. I had always known, on some level, that they made choices. But that day, I understood the full shape of what I had been participating in. I had spent years, almost a decade of my adult life making myself smaller, needing less, sending money I worked 12-hour shifts for, all in the quiet hope that one day they would show up. Not just physically. Show up the way parents are supposed to show up. See me. Choose me. Once. They had been given every opportunity to choose me that day, and they had chosen a recreational flag football tournament. I was not angry in the way people expect. I was not crying in a parking lot. I was very, very calm. The kind of calm that only comes when something inside you finally stops fighting. I went to dinner alone that night. I ordered the nicest thing on the menu. I had a glass of wine. I called my friend and told her everything, and she said the thing that I needed to hear, which was not, "I'm so sorry," or "That's terrible." She said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I said, "I'm going to stop." Just that. Stop. My mother texted me that evening to say the tournament had been fun, and my brother's team had placed second and wasn't that exciting. She did not mention my graduation. She did not ask how it went. There was a photo attached of my brother in his flag football jersey, grinning. I did not respond. I did not respond the next day either, or the day after that. On the fourth day, my mother called. She asked why I hadn't been answering. I told her I had graduated. I told her I had walked across that stage with nobody in the audience who was there for me. I told her I had made dinner reservations for a celebration that I had eaten alone. I told her all of this in the same quiet voice I used when I said okay on the phone 3 days before the ceremony, because that is the voice I have when I have decided something that cannot be undecided. She said she had hoped I would understand. She said family is complicated. She said my brother needed them. I said I understood everything perfectly. Then I told her I would not be sending money anymore. She went silent. That particular silence, the one that happens when someone has just recalculated the situation and doesn't like the new numbers, is something I had never heard from her before. I had never given her reason to be silent like that. She said, "What do you mean?" I said I meant exactly what I had said. She said we could talk about this, that I was upset, that I wasn't being rational. I said I was more rational than I had ever been in my life. She said that the $1,800 a month was something they had come to rely on, that there were bills, that my father's hours had been cut again, that they needed me. I said I needed someone in the audience at my graduation, and they had chosen a flag football tournament. She started to say something else, and I said I loved her, and I hung up. Here's what I want to tell you, because this is the part that doesn't get said enough in stories like this one. What came after the phone call was not triumphant. It was not a movie moment. It was very hard. I second-guessed myself for weeks. I lay awake going over every version of the story, looking for the interpretation that made everyone's behavior make sense in a way I could live with peacefully. I wondered if I was being selfish. I wondered if I was abandoning them. I wondered if my brother really was struggling in some way I wasn't seeing. My mother called 11 times in the first 2 weeks. My father called twice, which was notable because he rarely called at all. My brother texted once to say I was being dramatic. I did not engage. Not because I was playing games, but because I had said what I needed to say and there was nothing left to add. In the meantime, I took the $1,800 I was no longer sending and I opened a high-yield savings account. I named it in my phone. I called it mine. 7 months passed. I was at work on a Wednesday, just finishing a double shift, when my mother called again. I almost didn't answer. I had been not answering for most of those 7 months, with occasional brief calls when her messages sounded genuinely alarmed. This time, something in the tone of her voicemail made me call back. She told me they were in trouble. Real trouble, she said. Not the usual kind. My parents had refinanced their home twice over the years. The second refinance had come at a bad time, with a variable rate that had climbed steadily. They had also, I learned in this phone call, taken out a personal loan to help cover my brother's expenses after he lost his retail management job 6 months prior. He had been unemployed since then and was still living with them. They were behind on the mortgage. Significantly behind. The number my mother said, haltingly, was $43,000. I did not say anything for a moment. She said they had looked at every option. She said they had talked to the bank. She said the only way to keep the house was a lump sum to get current, and they didn't have it, and they needed me. She said, "You're the only one who can help us." And there it was. The sentence that I had been hearing, in various forms, for almost a decade. You're the only one. We need you. You've always been so responsible. You've always been the strong one. You've always been there for us. I thought about what always being there had looked like. $1,800 a month for years. Bus rides to a summer program I attended alone. A graduation ceremony with an empty seat where my family should have been. I asked her one question. I said, "Mom, do you remember what you told me the week before my graduation?" She said she didn't understand what that had to do with anything. I said it had everything to do with everything. There was a long pause. She said she was sorry about the graduation. She said she had thought I understood. She said these things happen in families. I said I knew these things happened in families. I said I had spent 32 years watching exactly these things happen in our family. She started to cry. I want to be honest about what it felt like to hear her cry, because this is the part people don't tell you. It felt terrible. It still felt terrible even though I had made my decision. Loving someone and recognizing a pattern are not mutually exclusive. You can do both at the same time, and it is one of the most exhausting things a person can do. I told my mother that I loved her. I told her that I was not going to give them $43,000. I told her I was also not going to resume the monthly transfers. I told her that if she and my father wanted a relationship with me, a real one, not a financial arrangement dressed up as a family, I was open to that, but it was going to have to look different from everything it had looked like up to now. She said she didn't know what that meant. I said it meant they would need to figure out the mortgage without me. I said there were HUD-approved housing counselors who offered free consultations. I said there were options they hadn't explored. I said my brother was 30 years old and employed adults did not require two parents and a sister's entire discretionary income to survive. She cried harder. I stayed on the line for a few more minutes. I didn't fill the silence with reassurances I didn't mean. I just stayed there, because she was my mother and I was not cruel, but I was done. When we hung up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a while. The concrete was that particular shade of gray that's only under fluorescent lights. I could hear a distant beeping from a truck backing up somewhere on the street below. I thought about the first time I had ever sent them money. I had been so happy to do it, so proud that I had something to give. I had called my mother to tell her the transfer had gone through, and she had said, "Oh, good, that's a relief," and I had felt, for one moment, like I was finally enough. I was chasing that feeling for years without realizing it. The feeling of being enough. The feeling of mattering. And the cruelest thing about that particular chase is that the people you're running toward keep moving the finish line, and you keep running. And you call that love, when really it is just exhaustion wearing love's clothes. I did not give them the $43,000. They did lose the house. That happened. And it was hard to know, and I grieved something about it even though I had not lived there for years. My brother moved out when the house sold into an apartment he found himself, with a roommate, like an adult. My parents moved into a smaller rental. My mother called to tell me it was actually quite nice, which was the first time in months she had called without asking me for something, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, and it was the closest thing to a normal conversation we had had in longer than I could clearly remember. That was 8 months ago. Things are not perfectly repaired between us. I don't know if they will ever be what I once hoped they would be. My brother and I have had one conversation since all of this brief, surface level, both of us being careful with each other in the way you are with someone whose behavior you now see clearly and are not sure what to do with. My father, who has always said less than he should, called me on my birthday last month and told me he was proud of me. He said it like it cost him something to say it, and I think maybe it did, and I accepted it for what it was. I am not bitter. I want to say that clearly, because I know that's what people expect, a story like this wrapped in bitterness, a narrator who is hard and cold and done with everyone. I am none of those things. I am a nurse who works long shifts and comes home to an apartment with east-facing windows and a kitchen that is entirely mine. I have a savings account that I call mine in my phone. I have my BSN framed on the wall above my desk. I have a friendship I almost took for granted that I now protect fiercely. And I have something I did not have for most of my adult life, which is the knowledge that choosing myself is not the same as abandoning the people I love. Those are two separate things, and confusing them cost me almost a decade. I told you at the beginning that I sat in that folding chair in my cap and gown and understood that something had to change. What I understood, more specifically, was this. I had spent years performing love without ever receiving it in equal measure, and calling myself strong for not complaining about the difference. What I thought was strength was actually just silence. And silence is not strength. Silence is what you do when you don't yet believe your own voice deserves to be heard. I believe it now. If you're watching this and some part of what I've said sounds familiar, if you're the one who always shows up, the one who always sends money, the one whose milestones get rescheduled around someone else's recreation, I want to say something to you directly. Not as advice, just as something someone else learned the hard way, on a folding chair, alone, holding a diploma nobody came to watch her earn. You are not too much. You are not dramatic. You are not asking for something unreasonable when you ask for the basic reciprocity that is supposed to come with loving someone. The people who have made you feel otherwise have benefited enormously from you believing them. You are allowed to stop, not in anger, not as punishment, just as a simple, quiet act of recognizing what is real and deciding that real is where you want to live from now on. I put my diploma on the wall the same afternoon I got home from graduation. I hung it straight. I stood in front of it for a minute. Nobody had seen me walk across that stage, but I had walked across it. I had earned it in the break room at midnight and on the floor of my apartment at 2 in the morning, and in every parking garage, an early morning and 12-hour shift that had gotten me to that room. It was mine. All of it was mine. And that turned out to be more than enough.